Kaden Honeycutt has been released from Nice Motorsports effective immediately, and it sounds like Zilisch will be finally announced at some point this week. They'll be going full-time NASCAR Cup racing in 2026. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and our Motorsports story discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're first going to take a look at a couple paint schemes that have been revealed over the course last couple days. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Jeremy Clemens' 2025 AW Power Scheme that we'll see this weekend at Watkins Glen. I really like this scheme quite a bit. It's kind of a throwback to an old scheme that we saw many years ago. I think it looks solid. The colors look pretty good on this car. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack at Watkins Glen. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Brad Keslowski's 2025 Bill Submarines Boston Red Sox scheme that we'll see at New Hampshire Motor Speedway next month. I really like this car in all honesty. I was kind of a big fan of it last year, and it's pretty cool that the Boston Red Sox with the association with John Henry and the Fenway Group. I think this looks really solid. I think did a pretty good job on this one. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack at New Hampshire. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Cody Ware's 2025 Evel Knievel scheme that we'll see this weekend at Watkins Glen. Scheme looks alright in my opinion. I think it's pretty cool that Evel Knievel stepping up and helping sponsor that team this weekend. The car looks solid. It does look good. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack at Watkins Glen. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Brendan Poole's 2025 Easy Lift scheme that we'll see this weekend at Watkins Glen. We've seen Easy Lift sponsoring a couple races with Brendan Poole this season, but I gotta say this one actually does look good. I think the colors do look pretty solid overall. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend at Watkins Glen. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about William Byron. As was reported by the NASCAR Insights accounts earlier this afternoon, that William Byron has now officially surpassed Kyle Larson on laps led for 2025. Coming this weekend, Kyle Larson had led 873 laps in the NASCAR Cup Series this year, while William Byron has surpassed that and now has led 910 laps. William Byron will be looking to become the first driver of the season to reach 1,000 laps led in the NASCAR Cup Series, with Kyle Larson being close down with 873. I think that there's a good chance that Byron will get to 1,000 in the next couple weeks at the speed of that 24 car shown. I also think that Kyle Larson will have a good chance and opportunity to get back on his winning ways and show that really good pace and speed going forward. I think Larson will get back into the winning ways and start leading more laps in the future once again. Nonetheless, good to see Byron surpass those numbers. Only 9 or 10 laps in NASCAR Cup competition, as he looks, I believe, only for the second or third time in his career, lead over 1,000 laps in a season. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. As Kyle Larson competed in the Front Row Challenge earlier this evening, and Kyle Larson is able to come off the corner at the track and win the Front Row Challenge. I believe Kyle Larson has competed in the last 5 or 6 Front Row Challenge races at this track that he competed at, and I think he's now won 4 or 5 of the last 5 or 6 or something like that, I'm pretty sure. And that's big for Kyle Larson's confidence, because one thing we haven't really seen from Kyle Larson as consistently, he's not been able to go out there and contend for wins on a week-by-week basis, so I've seen some good pace and speed from that team over time. I think that this could be a really big confidence booster for Larson, so to see him go out there and win is a really big deal. Congratulations to Kyle Larson on going out there and winning the Front Row Challenge, a well-earned and well-deserved victory for Kyle Larson to get that done. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Derek White. As it was announced earlier today that Derek White will drive the number 69 for MBM Motorsports this weekend and the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race at Watkins Glen. Derek White has not made a start in NASCAR competition, I believe, so far in 2025. He, of course, had some legal stuff that happened behind the scenes, unfortunately, I'm not really going to get into. But Derek White, pretty cool to see him back in the sport. He's going to be with the team. It's probably going to be slow. The MBM Motorsports team really hasn't shown a lot of great pace and speed, so I really am not expecting Derek White to be a major factor and strong contender in this event. I think they're going to try to bring the pace and speed for him. We'll see how he can do, but realistically, like I said, I'm not expecting much. I think Derek White could have a little bit of a struggle going into this weekend's Truck Series race at Watkins Glen. We'll see how he can do this weekend. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Stephen Parsons. As it was announced earlier this afternoon that Stephen Parsons will drive the 45 for Alpha Prime Racing this weekend in the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Watkins Glen. I believe this will be the first time we've seen Stephen Parsons in the NASCAR Xfinity Series with Alpha Prime Racing this season. He's made starts with Alpha Prime Racing before. I don't remember if he's driven the 45 car before. I don't remember exactly. But this team has shown some decent speed as of late, including Brendan Poole having a lot of top 20s on a consistent consistent basis. And the last 4 or 5 weeks, we've been seeing some pretty big improvement from Parker Retzlaff, just scored a top 15 finish at Iowa Speedway as well. I think Seven's a really, really underrated driver. The guy has gotten the best out of equipment at teams like Henderson Motorsports, Alpha Prime Racing, and mid-pack the backmarker teams over the years. So I think this is a really good driver to bring into the program. I think he's going to have a solid shot and opportunity for a decent performance. I don't think anyone's going home for Xfinity. I could be wrong on that front, but I think if anyone's going home, I don't think he'll have an issue doing it. He's a decent road course racer as well. So we'll see how he ends up doing. I think he'll have a solid chance and opportunity and show some really good speed this weekend in the Xfinity Series race at Watkins Glen. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Iowa Speedway. As reported by Adam Stern earlier today from an article that came out, the Iowa Speedway holds about 24,000 fans for attendance for the event. According to what Adam Stern has also reported as well, temporary seats for the track were not built like they were in 2024. If temporary seats had been built for the event, there would have been around 40 to 45,000 fans that would have shown up. I believe the track holds around like 24 to 30,000 fans. I think that's the number I've heard is what they hold. And you have to look at the infield camping as well. Now we're talking about this because obviously there was a lot of talk about the attendance for the Brickyard 400 where 70,000 people showed up, around 70K showed up to the Brickyard 400 this year, where the stands did not look that great. But you got to remember, you're not going to get 250,000 people to show up in a stadium at a NASCAR event in Indianapolis like you are for the Indy 500. The Brickyard 400 doesn't have that same luster it had many, many years ago, especially since the issues that they had not too long ago. So you're not going to get that big attendance that I think they're really, really looking for at this point. But I still think you're having decent attendance, and I think there's also questions whether the events at Iowa are going to happen next year. There's some questions about that at this point. We'll see if this event does come back in 2026. We'll see what happens going forward into the future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Lamborghini. As it was reported by, I believe, the Sports Car 365 account earlier today, the Lamborghini has officially paused its IMSA GTP program and will not be returning currently at the moment for the 2026 season. The SC63 car has been on track for the last couple of years in GTP. I believe they're still planning to be in the World Endurance Championship, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong on that front. But it's really kind of disappointing to see a team like Lamborghini, because I've seen a lot of people kind of going after the Lamborghini program because it's not been as competitive as like the Penske Porsche program, or it's been as competitive as the Acura teams or Wayne Taylor Racing or Cadillac or any of those teams, part of those manufacturers, or other things like BMW with Rahal, which we know Rahal Letterman Lanigan will not be returning to them. There's talk that they could be coming to NASCAR potentially next. There's been some rumors around that. But it's disappointing to hear that Lamborghini will not be back next year in IMSA GTP. I really wish they were, because again, I think they'd have a solid chance and opportunity to be pretty competitive if they got the opportunity to show it. There were some flashes for this organization and flashes for this program. They're still going to be in the lower series going forward, so they're not leaving IMSA altogether. Just currently at the moment right now, they're not going to be in GTP. They're going to be out of it currently at the moment. Disappointing news, though, nonetheless, regardless of who it is. It's disappointing to see a team that you want to see be competitive. It's disappointing to see them not going to be around at least for the foreseeable future, including in 2026. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Parker Clerman. As it was announced earlier this afternoon in a statement from Henderson Motorsports that Parker Clerman will drive the 75 for Henderson Motorsports this weekend in the Craftsman Truck Series race at Watkins Glen. This is going to be the first time that we have seen Henderson Motorsports back on the racetrack since the unfortunate passing of the owner of the team, Charlie Henderson. This team, of course, had an opportunity to win the race at Daytona earlier this year, but of course they got disqualified from that event. And I think it'd be a really cool and emotional win for Parker Clerman if he can take this team to victory lane. And Parker has taken Henderson Motorsports to victory lane on a road course before. Going back to the Mid-Ohio in 2022, I believe it was, when he drove for them in part-time stints, and he had some really good runs with that team and program. And I do expect that Parker Clerman is going to have a solid chance and a pretty strong opportunity to be pretty competitive with this team, because they've shown some flashes on road courses over the years, and it's also good to see this team back on the racetrack as well. I really miss seeing this team out there. They have the regular schedule plan. I think they're going to run Bristol potentially. They talked about that. They're going to be running the Charlotte Roval. It sounds like they're going to run Phoenix as well, and Parker Clerman, I believe, will be the driver in a majority of the races going forward throughout the remainder of the year. So I really hope this team can be competitive. I think they'll have a good chance of showing some really good pace and speed, and I think there's going to be some good stuff coming from Parker Clerman, as I think he'll have a good chance and opportunity to be really fast this weekend at Watkins Glen. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about IndyCar silly season. Now, I don't do a lot of coverage in regards mainly to IndyCar silly season. I cover NASCAR silly season on this channel quite a bit. But since Bob Pockrass has been more involved with IndyCar since IndyCar went to Fox for 2026 and 25 and beyond, and signing that extension with Fox, with IndyCar as they become a part owner of it, Bob Pockrass has been a lot more involved in IndyCar and been at the racetracks quite a bit. And he covers some things in regards to IndyCar silly season for 2026. He does mention the two big things that are being looked at is what's going to happen between Will Power and David Malukas. There's a lot of talk and conversation that this could be the final year for Will Power at Penske, and there's a potential possibility David Malukas, who's driving for AJ Foyt Racing currently at the moment. There's talk that David Malukas could move away from AJ Foyt Racing and move to Team Penske next year, and even Bob mentioned this, but there's talk as well that Will Power could end up going to AJ Foyt Racing next year and taking over the number 4 car going into 2026. There are also some that think that Will Power is going to stick around. It seems like that keeps changing on a week-by-week basis. Some say he's going to be back. Some say that he is going to be going away. It's kind of an unknown at this point what's going to happen with Will Power, which I think Will Power a lot of this year has been the best Penske car. Say what you want to say. I think all 3 drivers are good at that team, but the team has also been having a lot of struggles this year. And while I think Dave Malukas is really, really good, and I know Bob mentioned Miles Rowe, and I'm not sure Miles Rowe is fully ready at this point to go IndyCar racing on a full-time basis, but it'd be interesting if he got the opportunity to maybe make the jump as well. So we'll see what happens there, but I think for that 12th car comes down between Will Power and David Malukas. The other one to look at is Rinus VeeKay. Rinus VeeKay has been with Dale Coyne Racing this year, and his name keeps getting brought up in a lot of conversations because he is a very talented race car driver, but funding is always a big issue around Rinus VeeKay because he almost didn't have a ride going into this season until the last few weeks. But I think ever since they got Michael Kanen into that program has shown a lot of improvement and shown a lot more pace and a lot more speed. So I really do believe there is a chance that Rinus could end up in a better ride going forward. It doesn't sound like he's going to be a candidate for the Andretti team, as it does sound like Marcus Ericsson is going to be back with the team next year. Rob Edwards kind of confirmed that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the remainder of silly season for the year. But I think there's some big stuff in the plans and in the cards going forward into the not-so-distant future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kaylee Bryson. As it was announced earlier this evening that Kaylee Bryson will make her ARCA debut in the main ARCA series at Madison Speedway at the end of this month, driving a number 17 car for Cook Racing Technologies. Kaylee Bryson earlier this year made her ARCA West debut at Sonoma Raceway in the number 17 Cook Racing Technologies car, and I think there was a lot of high expectations considering the team that she was driving for, which a couple years ago they were really good. I think they had Tyler Reif on the team at one point. Unfortunately, she had a lot of mechanical gremlins and a lot of mechanical failures that happened during the event that unfortunately affected her. I think she is a lot better of a driver than the equipment has shown. She has won races in Trans Am, if I'm not mistaken. She's also won a lot of dirt races over the years, and she's someone that's trying to transfer over to racing in NASCAR and ARCA as well. And I think that this could be a strong opportunity for her. Now, obviously, one of the big issues is going to be the equipment side of things, because you're not going to have a lot of really strong and competitive cars. You're obviously going to have the Venturini cars that will probably be distant, like Isabel Robusto, Lawless Allen. You're also probably, of course, going to see Brendan Buttermeat Queen and Brent Cruz over behind the wheel of those cars, going to be super, super fast and competitive. But I think Kaylee Bryson is going to be in a decent car if that equipment can survive and not have mechanical gremlins, because we've seen those cars, unfortunately, with Tanner Reif and those cars struggle a little bit with the reliability, among other things we saw in the truck series as well when Corey Roper had help from the Cook Racing Technologies teams, with everyone helping over there. But I think that Kaylee Bryson is someone who can get into a car like this and be a little bit more competitive. So we'll see how she ends up doing with the Cook Racing Technologies team this week or in the future. We'll see how she can do at Madison. I think she's got a decent opportunity here. We'll see if they can bring the pace and speed for this weekend in Madison with the Cook Racing Technologies team and organization as a whole. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Riley Herbst. As it was confirmed on the intros earlier today that Riley Herbst will drive the number 19 for Joe Gibbs Racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series this weekend at Watkins Glen. I believe this will be the first or second time we've seen Riley Herbst compete with Joe Gibbs Racing in the Xfinity Series this year on the road courses. I think he's made other starts throughout the year. I think he ran at Sonoma earlier this year, if I'm not mistaken, and he's made a couple other starts with the organization so far this year. Now, Riley Herbst is someone who I think is a decent road course racer. He had some decent qualifying speed in the Cup Series race at Cody, but unfortunately messed up, and I believe his lap time got deleted, I'm pretty sure, during qualifying, where he had a chance to win the pole for the Cup race at Cody, the only time we've really seen him be relevant so far this year. Now, obviously, there is a lot of really strong competition going into this weekend. We're going to talk about some of those people in the Xfinity in the Truck Series races in just a short little bit, but I think Riley Herbst is someone who could have a really good run. The 19 car's shown some really good speed with Eric Almirola this season. They've also had really good speed with Ty Gibbs, who was a pretty big factor and believe in some of the races this year. And I expect Herbst, while he won't be probably as good as Ty Gibbs behind the wheel of this car, I certainly do think that Riley Herbst will have a solid chance and opportunity to run pretty solidly with this team and organization throughout this season. I think he's been not great with 23-11. I don't think he was ready to make that jump up to the NASCAR Cup Series this year. But when he goes down and runs Xfinity, he honestly does a decent job. And he's a better driver fit for the Xfinity Series at this point than competing in the NASCAR Cup Series. So we'll see how things end up going for Riley Herbst this weekend at Watkins Glen. I think they're going to try to bring the pace and speed for him. I think the Joe Gibbs racing cars have shown some good stuff. We'll see if Riley Herbst can be a factor and a solid contender for this weekend's race at Watkins Glen, and see if they can have some good speed at the race coming up here soon. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Sammy Smith. As it was confirmed on the intros earlier today that Sammy Smith will drive the number 7 for Spire Motorsports in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series this weekend at Watkins Glen. I believe this will be the second time we see Sammy Smith behind the wheel of the number 7 truck for Spire Motorsports. He drove for them, I believe, at North Wilkesboro earlier this year, drove for that organization, and showed some decent pace and some solid speed with that program. And I think that Sammy Smith, say what you want to say about him, he's shown some improvement in the NASCAR Xfinity Series this year. He's going down to run the Truck Series race to try to get a little bit more experience, because we've seen drivers jump down to trucks from Xfinity, and while the Xfinity and Truck Series cars are completely different, I think getting that experience in track time is so important for these young drivers. And for Sammy Smith, this is going to be a good opportunity. Now, unlike the 07 truck, which we're going to talk about here in just a short little bit, this is actually a really decent truck. This truck has gone to victory lane so far this year with Kyle Busch. It's also gone to victory lane with Carson so far this year. And other drivers like Jordan Taylor have been really, really good behind the wheel of this equipment so far this season. So I do expect that Sammy Smith is going to be somewhat of a factor for a really good run here this weekend with this team. I think Spire is going to do what they can to try to bring the best equipment they can. And I think that Sammy Smith will have a solid chance and a very strong opportunity for a good run. I expect things to go very, very well. I think Sammy will have at least a top 5, top 10 truck. I don't think he's a favorite to win with a lot of the really good competition running this weekend, but I think he's going to have a solid opportunity for a very, very good run. We'll see if he can bring the pace and speed. I do expect those cars, though, to be, those trucks, to be really solid and very, very well in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race coming up here very soon at Watkins Glen. We'll see if that pace and speed can be here very soon for the team and organization as well. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about John Kernan. Now, if you were on Twitter last night, you probably saw a very controversial tweet from someone who is a former pit reporter that worked at ESPN for many years. That was John Kernan. Now, John Kernan, for those who don't know, worked at ESPN from around 1990 on the NASCAR side till, I believe it was 2000, when the contract ended with ESPN. Now, he stayed with RPM tonight, I believe up until the end of that program in the early to mid-2000s. He was there around 2001 to 2002, and he really has not been around ever since in NASCAR. And he made a very controversial tweet. Now, originally, he called out stage racing, and that was a big thing he kind of called out at that point. But then he added on that he was not a big fan of the lead commentator for the NBC portion, which is Lee Diffy. He says that his accent is something that he is not a big fan of, and he says it should be an American who is calling the race. Now, personally, I really have to completely disagree with John Kernan, especially for someone who worked in this industry for a very, very long time, and many, many years as well. I found these in comments to be incredibly disrespectful. Say what you will say about Lee Diffy. Lee Diffy is absolutely top of the line when it comes to calling races. Is he absolutely perfect? No. But generally, when you look at the commentators out there, he is the number one guy. He is certainly a lot better than Mike Joy currently at the moment right now. That is for sure. And do we just forget that there were points where David Hobbs, who is from the UK, which, by the way, Lee Diffy is from Australia, not the UK, just for everyone's information. We had David Hobbs, who called race on CBS for many years, and Jackie Stewart was part of the ABC Wild World of Sports, who was a co-commentator for races during those times in the 70s and even in the early 80s as well. And who cares where someone's that kind of stuff is? I just think that John Kernan is absolutely out of line, and it's completely ridiculous that you're turned off because of who's calling the race. I just found that to be completely unprofessional, and I get that John Kernan has not been around in the sport for many years, but for someone who was around for a long time in the sport, I just found these comments to be completely disrespectful and just a stupid move from someone, again, who's been in the industry for a long time and many years, who probably won't be back in the industry. That's why people didn't hire this guy for a long time, because of things like this, and it's irritating to see someone who I think a lot of people used to have respect for, and it's just lost a lot of respect from a lot of people. I just found those comments to be dumb. It's not the smartest thing to do, especially when you have a platform. You should know better than this, John. It was a dumb move on your part and a really stupid move on your part, considering it's a controversial move that did not need to happen. You could have just kept your mouth shut after the stage racing side of things. Instead, you said something that was not probably the smartest thing that you could have done as someone in this industry, and in my opinion, a shame on you for saying the comments that you said. It was probably not the smartest thing to say, and basically calling someone out like that was not very smart on your part, John, and I think you should know better than that as someone who's been in the industry for as long as you have and for how many years you were around in this industry as a whole. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Justin Haley. As it was announced earlier today that Justin Haley will drive the number 11 car for Kaulig Racing in a couple weeks from now at Daytona International Speedway. Now, we'll get to the other part of the Kaulig Racing announcement in just a short little bit, but this I believe will be the first time that Justin Haley has competed in the NASCAR Xfinity Series so far in 2025, and he's reuniting with Kaulig Racing, because for many years, Justin Haley drove for Kaulig Racing in NASCAR competition. He drove for them in the Xfinity Series from 2019 up until the end of 2021, when he, of course, got promoted to the NASCAR Cup Series on a full-time basis in 2022 with Kaulig Racing and stayed with the team for 2 seasons. Then it was shockingly announced in the middle of 2023 that Justin Haley would not be returning to the organization and would be moving on to go over to Rickwa Racing for 2024, and now will be joining up with this team in 2020, and of course went over to Spire Motorsports this year. There's obviously been a lot of unknowns what's going to happen with Justin Haley's career past the season. Something he may lose his ride at the end of the year with the number 17, despite the fact that I've defended Justin Haley. And say what you want to say, I think that 7 car has actually shown a little bit more speed in recent weeks. He's had some top 10 speed, top 15, top 20 speed in recent weeks, and I like what I've been seeing from the number 7 car, so I don't think Justin Haley is the problem. But he's going to be racing at a type of track in Xfinity, especially where he's been really good, considering I believe Justin Haley has 1 or 2 career wins at Daytona International Speedway in Xfinity competition, and anytime he gets behind the wheel of a Kaulig car, he does really good at super speedways. For all 4 of his wins in Xfinity came as super speedway tracks, and I think having someone who has that experience at super speedway tracks, who's very, very good, I think that's a really good decision on the team. Now, obviously, you're going to have to worry about Austin Hill and Jesse Love, who've been extremely strong in those events, but I think they might have finally gotten a challenger to get behind the wheel of the number 11 car, and finally got a challenger to go up against the 2 RCR guys, because there really needs to be someone who can go after the RCR duo, who's been so dominant at these tracks. And don't get me wrong, I love seeing dominance from time to time, but when you see the same guys win, some people do get frustrated about that. So having Justin Haley get behind the wheel, I think he's going to be solid. I think he will be pretty competitive for sure, and I think that Kaulig Racing is going to bring some solid pace and really good speed. We'll see what Justin Haley can do this week in the race at Daytona coming up here in the not-so-distant future. I think he's going to have good pace, and I think he certainly will have some really good speed when we get to Daytona in about a couple weeks from now, like only 3 weeks as a matter of fact from now. I think it'll be pretty good going into that Friday night, in my opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Busch. As it was confirmed earlier today that Kyle Busch will make his final NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series start of 2025, as he'll drive the 07 truck for Spire Motorsports this weekend at Watkins Glen. Like I mentioned, this is going to be the final time we will see Kyle Busch behind the wheel of a NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series truck for 2025. Now, going into this season, we all kind of thought that Kyle Busch was going to be a major factor, and I had him winning 3 or 4 of these races this year. However, Kyle Busch so far in this season, despite the fact last year he got 2 or 3 wins with Spire, he's only won 1 race so far this year, and that was at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Now, granted, majority of the race that Kyle Busch has ran has been in the 07 truck. In the 07 truck for a lot of races this year, that truck has not been really, really good. Drivers like BJ McLeod have struggled. Even Kyle Larson was not super good in this truck at Homestead, despite the fact he won the event. He still still ran top 3 or top 4. And other drivers like Michael McDowell and Justin Haley and even Carson and even people like Patrick Emerling who drove this truck kind of struggle with the Spire Motorsports 07 truck because I think this is the weakest truck in the field. That's why there's a lot of talk and rumblings that they're going to be downsizing their truck series program going into next year because I think they have too many trucks in their fleet, and I think the 07 truck is the 4th truck at the team at this point, though I will say a lot of times it acts like the 3rd truck considering Andres Perez has really struggled with this team so far this season. But I think Kyle Busch will be able to get a chance and opportunity to get the best out of this equipment. I think they're going to do what they can to give Kyle Busch an opportunity, though there's going to be a ton of competition, and we'll talk about one of his competitors here in just a short little bit with him running the race as well. But I think Busch will be a solid factor, and I think he'll have a decent chance and opportunity for a solid finish. I think he'll be a factor for a good run. I don't expect to be a major contender for the overall win. I think he'll have some good speed, though. We'll see what Kyle Busch can do this weekend in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race coming up here at Watkins Glen later this week. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Brad Keslowski. Now, if you were on Twitter or X earlier this evening, you saw what Brad Keslowski was talking about on Twitter. And Brad Keslowski talked about the lack of respect that we've seen on the racetrack in recent years. He says, one thing I've noticed as a driver over the last 10 years, the lack of respect in the sport has been there. A lot of guys are taking each other out, wrecking each other, and it's something that I've noticed in recent years that I'm not a really, really big fan of. I really appreciate that someone like Brad Keselowski who's been in NASCAR for a very long time and who was kind of in this position a while back in like 2010 to like 2014 area. I really appreciate someone like Brad calling a lot of this behavior out. I remember when I became a fan of NASCAR, when you had a lot of guys that would respect each other on the racetrack, and granted, you would have aggressive racing from time to time, but the aggressive nature of this sport was just not there. The biggest issue right now is that when you have a car, which we'll talk about here when it comes to the racing product in just a short little bit, you have a car that promotes a lot of this stuff because with the composite bodies, you can run into a lot of these guys unless you break the right rear toe link, which Bubba Wallace is able to get an opportunity to get back up to the front. But we have seen a lot more lack of respect on the racetrack from a lot of the younger crop of drivers. And a lot of that is the culture that they come up through. A lot of these guys were in the Craftsman Truck Series a few years ago. We all remember how bad the Truck Series was from about like 2021 or like 2019 up until around 2024 early, where I think that the respect in trucks has actually gone up since a lot of these guys like your Carson Hosevars and some of your younger drivers who've come up through the ranks have shown that. And I think that some of those guys that came from trucks have gone to Xfinity and they don't really show the respect that I think that they should be showing. And we've got people like Austin Hill who are right-rearing people down the straightaway among other things as well and intentionally causing crashes. And we see an increase of suspensions of drivers in the last couple of years. Think about Chase Elliott. You think about other drivers that got suspended like Bubba Wallace, for example. There just hasn't been that respect level I think a lot of us fans have been really, really wanting to see. And I'm glad that we have an owner. And I know Brad is going to be hypocritical for Brad to say this considering Brad Keselowski was someone who wasn't involved with a lot of incidents and a lot of controversy as a driver for many, many years back in 2014 when he got into everybody. But I think he learned how to calm himself, and I think that made him overall a much better race car driver as well, because I think that made him become stronger, and Brad didn't have that, and I think Brad didn't really love all the aggressive nature that he kind of caused over time. So I respect Brad for calling this out. Again, it kind of comes off hypocritical from some people considering Brad had done some of this stuff like this in the past before, but I think it's good to see someone who's been around for a very long time. I wish the respect in the sport was a lot better, but unfortunately there is a lack of respect in the sport, and I think it's something that absolutely needs to 100% be cleaned up with the sport going forward into the future if the sport is going to survive long term, especially with a lot of younger guys coming up through the ranks currently at this moment. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the racing product. Now, one of the biggest talking points coming out of this past weekend's NASCAR Cup Series race was a racing at Iowa Speedway. And generally when you listen to the fans, when you listen to the drivers, when you listen to a lot of people that were talking about this race, including myself, many of them were really frustrated with this race. Iowa Speedway basically encapsulated a lot of the current problems that we're seeing in the next-gen era, especially with the next-gen car. I think a lot of the major issues we've had with this car were encapsulated throughout this day. Number one, the difficulty to pass. Should passing be absolutely 100% easy? No. It shouldn't take instance to pass. But if you're faster than a guy in front of you and you clearly especially see lap cars can hold up the leaders, that's a major problem. There's no reason that William Byron, Brad Kazowski, or anyone should have been held up by guys in 34th or 35th place for almost 30 to 40 laps. That is just not acceptable. If a car is really close in performance and generally was up front and they're going a lap down, let's say 10th to 15th, that's kind of normal, right? But it doesn't take forever. And there was just no passing whatsoever. I saw this with Chase Briscoe and Ryan Blaney in the middle portion, where Ryan Blaney was clearly faster than Chase Briscoe. He couldn't get by him. And then he had all the wrecking that took place in the race. And that wrecking just really hurt the product for me throughout the day as well. And that wrecking was just unacceptable from a lot of drivers in the sport, especially veterans who kept causing crashes. We had 7 or 8 crashes in like a 60-lap span. And that's just not acceptable. It's just ridiculous that we had wreck, caution, green flag, caution, wreck, all that stuff throughout the day. And then the other big issue is the fuel mileage stuff. Look, I love fuel mileage racing. I think fuel mileage racing at times can be really good, except on super speedways. But it's becoming a thing every week. And when something is consistently happening every time and it doesn't feel special. That's why we all love the great fuel mileage race in 2011, because that year you had a lot of organic fuel mileage finishes. With this next-gen car, you can pull away even if you're saving fuel. This car has major flaws and major problems, and it absolutely needs to be solved sooner rather than later, because you're going to have fans that are going to get turned away. And there's been times this year, and especially the last couple of years with this next-gen car on short tracks, that I think the racing product has been almost unwatchable in the last couple of years. And I think there's been more of that at times even this year, even going back to last year in 2023 and 22, because you think about Martinsville in the fall before the controversy, that race was solid. And I think Bowman Gray earlier this year was good. And I think North Wilkesboro was a solid race. The problem is we have a car issue that absolutely needs to be fixed. And it's been 4 years since we got on short track racing. And this car, it's not just the short tracks, a lot of type of tracks where I think the racing right now is just not good. And I think there is so much that needs to be done, because if this doesn't get resolved sooner rather than later, you're going to have fans that are going to turn away from the sport, and they're just going to stop watching altogether. And I don't want to see that for the fans, but I think that's going to happen here soon if we don't get the product resolved here, because I think the current product that's being seen at the moment is not acceptable. It's ridiculous, and I think the product is just terrible that we are seeing currently at the moment in NASCAR on the short tracks, and I think it absolutely needs to be resolved here coming soon. Denny Hamlin agrees, and a lot of other people in the industry agree as well. There's just a lot of fundamental problems with this car that absolutely need to be fixed, in my opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Chris Buescher. As it was announced earlier today that Chris Buescher will make his NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series debut this weekend at Watkins Glen, as he'll drive the number 66 for Thor Sport Racing. Like I mentioned, this will be the first time that Chris Buescher has competed in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. I believe this will be the first time that Chris Buescher has done double duty in NASCAR since 2015, when he, of course, was driving part-time for Front Row Motorsports in the Cup Series at that point. Well, of course, he was running full-time for RFK Racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, where, of course, in 2015, he would go on to win the championship. The last time we saw Chris Buescher do double duty, Joe Logano had not won a championship. Jeff Gordon was racing in his final season, which, by the way, by the time you guys are watching, his birthday was yesterday, but happy late birthday to Jeff Gordon and Kurt Busch as well. And then, of course, you had other things happen, like Tony Stewart was still in the sport. He hadn't gotten his final win at that point, and Dale Jr. was still pretty competitive, and Jimmy Johnson was competitive. This is a really big deal, though, because Chris Buescher, look how good he is as a road course racer. He has been exceptionally phenomenal in the next-gen car at road course tracks, and I think he's had some really good cars at RFK Racing. And remember, he is a defending winner going into this year's race at Watkins Glen. He, of course, went up against Shane Van Gisbergen in the event and actually beat Shane Van Gisbergen straight up at the end of the day. And I expect, especially with this truck, I think he's going to be competitive. Now, I will say this about Thor Sport Racing. This team has not been super good, but they've had decent runs at Lime Rock, for example. Ty Majeski had top 5 speed throughout the day, and Cam Waters, say what you want to say, he salvaged a top 5 finish after running around 10th to 15th. But I think that this race, especially coming up with some of the guys racing event, you've got a really competitive truck series race that's going to be happening on Friday. And I expect Buescher to be a big factor for a potential win. I think that they're going to bring some really good pace and speed for Chris Buescher. I think he'll be up there in the top 5 for sure. I think this is one of the most stacked truck fields we've seen in quite some time. And I think Chris Buescher will have a good chance and opportunity to go out there and win. And I really hope we see Buescher go out there and contend for a victory, which could lead, because getting that extra experience could lead to him having a chance chance and opportunity to go out there and maybe go back-to-back in the Cup race. It's been almost a year at this point since Chris Buescher has won a NASCAR Cup race. Granted, he's been close to winning a few races this season, but I expect Buescher to be very fast. I expect to have a really strong car. I think they're going to bring some really good speed for Buescher this weekend. I think it actually will be the fastest Motorsport truck this weekend as well. I think it'll be even better than Ty Majeski. I think he's going to be competitive. It'll be the best the 66 truck has looked so far this season, and I think that Chris Buescher will have a pretty solid chance, and I think we'll have a pretty good and solid opportunity to go out there and pick up the win. I think it'll be pretty good and competitive. Yes, Connor Zilisch will be running this week. I'm sure going to talk about here in just a short little bit, but I look for Chris Buescher to be pretty solid and really good this weekend at Watkins Glen. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Michael McDowell. As it was announced early today that Michael McDowell will be back in the NASCAR Xfinity Series for the first time in quite some time. As it was announced, he'll drive the number 11 car for Kaulig Racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series this weekend at Watkins Glen. This is going to be the first time that Michael McDowell has competed in the NASCAR Xfinity Series since 2016 at Road America. Now, what's interesting about that race is he drove for Rich Schultz Racing in the number 2 car, and guess what he did? He went on to win the race and pick up the victory. Now, Michael McDowell is competing, and he's, of course, made some Truck Series starts, select runs so far this year. He drove, I believe, at Daytona in the 07 truck, and also has made some other starts, including, I believe, at Atlanta, where I think he had some decent speed as well. But Michael McDowell is a really, really good road course racer. Of course, he won the 2023 Indy Road Course race in the NASCAR Cup Series with Front Row Motorsports, and you think about how good he's been on road courses so far this year in the Cup Series. He had a top 5, top 10 car at Sonoma Raceway, had a dominant car early at Chicago before unfortunately having some mechanical gremlins and failures, and something broke on the car. And throttle cable, I think, snapped loose, I'm pretty sure, and had to go to the garage and get that fixed, and his day would unfortunately come to a close. I do expect Michael McDowell to be a pretty big factor for the victory in this 11 car, because we saw Carson Osbar drive this car last week at Iowa, and was really, really good. But there's one thing that could hurt him. There's a lot of really good competition this weekend in the Xfinity event. You obviously got guys like, let's just say, Connor Zilisch, who's won last year's race at Watkins Glen. He's going to be a really big factor. You're also going to have Shane Van Gisbergen. Shane Van Gisbergen is driving in the 9 car once again. He's been in that car twice. He won one, and he lost one. That 9 car has already won also this year with Daniel Suarez, who won at Mexico City. So I think that's going to be McDowell's biggest threat. And I think there's some other guys that are going to be really good, like Sheldon Creed and Sam Mayer, who've been really, really good at road course racing. And there's some other guys like Riley Herbst, who I expect to be solid, and even Kaz Gralla could be an outside factor as well. But I think McDowell is going to be pretty good for sure. But I think there's a lot more to this story. I mentioned it earlier, but Justin Haley is driving the number 11 car at Daytona next week. There's been a lot of talk that Spire and Kaulig Racing could be forming some sort of partnership. Now, Chris Rice did say on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio yesterday, or earlier last week, I should say, I think it was on Thursday, he confirmed that they will not be shutting down the Kaulig Racing Xfinity program going into next year. Was talk that program may not exist going into 2026. My best guess is that Spire Motorsports is going to be in Xfinity competition. I think it's no secret at this point that you are going to see that team in the Xfinity Series next season. There's too much smoke to the rumors at this point of how strong the Spire Motorsports team has been and looked, and I know they want to get back in Xfinity. They were in Xfinity a couple years ago, back in 2023, to try to help Carson Osbar get a little more prepared when he potentially moves up to Cup, which he did go Cup racing in 2024. So I think there's a lot of talk about that as well. There will be a question we have to ask: who else is going to drive this car in 2025? Again, it's been expected that Will Brown, we talked about a couple times, but Will Brown is heavily rumored to be driving to Portland, and Bob has basically confirmed it at this point that you're probably going to be seeing Will Brown drive at Portland. Remember, Cup Series drivers cannot run in the Xfinity Series once the playoffs officially start for the lower series. And of course, the Southern 500 weekend, the Cup guys are going to be out there at Darlington, while of course the Xfinity Series will be at Portland. So I could see someone going there, which IndyCar might crown their champion this week at this point. But I expect McDowell to be really, really good. And I think those Spire rumors and the Dodge and Ram rumors, especially with Colin in the Truck Series, I think there's a lot of legs to that at this point. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. But again, going back to Will Brown, I think Will Brown will definitely be pretty solid for sure if he does in fact end up driving for Kaulig in the event. And I expect that Michael McDowell will have a solid chance to win Watkins Glen. I think he's going to be somewhat a factor. I think we'll have a solid chance and opportunity for a great run. We'll see what Michael McDowell can do in the Xfinity Series race this weekend at Watkins Glen. I think it'll be pretty good and pretty competitive for sure this weekend in the NASCAR Xfinity Series race coming up at Watkins Glen very, very soon. And now we're going to head on to the first of two major stories in today's episode as we're talking about NASCAR's silly season once again. Now, Dorpo Leclerc was talking about some of the very interesting rumors that they have heard in the last couple of weeks. And there's three really big rumors that they have talked about on the channel and basically during the podcast as well. Let's first begin by talking about one of the smaller stories, and this begins with Brent Cruz. According to what they have heard, it sounds like Brent Cruz maybe have signed some things and maybe making some starts in the NASCAR Xfinity Series at some point in 2026. Brent Cruz has already had a big week so far this year. Has had a big week. Of course, it was announced he'll be owning his own Craftsman Truck Series team in select races. He'll be making a start in the number 70 trucks, with Nitro Motorsports helping out that team and program. And Brent Cruz will be making other starts throughout the year. He is still expected to drive for Tricon Garage in select races throughout the remainder of the year as well. And it sounds like he'll probably, if my best guess is if he is going to make some Xfinity Series starts in 2026, I am thinking more than likely that he'll be with Joe Gibbs Racing perhaps, which could have effect on drivers like Brandon Jones and Taylor Gray and William Sawalsh going into next year if, let's say, he goes full time. So I think Brent Cruz will turn 18 in January of 2026, but I could be wrong at that. So he could be full time, but I think he'll be at least making some starts, and I think he'll also make some starts in the Craftsman Truck Series. But he is very good. A lot of people compare him to Connor Zilisch, and I agree with that. I think Brent Cruz is about as good as Connor Zilisch when you look at talent. He's Toyota's version of Connor. I think he's definitely ready to see what he can do in Xfinity competition. I think he's shown some good stuff with Tricon this year, which we'll get to that in a short little bit for Kaden Honeycutt, but I think Brent Cruz will definitely be pretty good as well. The next big rumor is something we talked about on the channel earlier today. It sounds like there's a lot of growing steam that the Haas factory team could potentially be switching over to Toyota in 2026. Now, why could they be switching to Toyota? Well, obviously, we talked about this, but there's a lot of talk and speculation in the industry that potentially Legacy Motor Club could be looking at a backup plan going into 2026 if the lawsuit falls through. Remember, Legacy Motor Club is suing Rick Ware Racing currently at the moment for a charter dispute that happened earlier this year. They were supposed to become a 3-car operation in 2026. That obviously did not end up happening. They basically backed out of the deal. Rick Ware has claimed that they signed a deal for 2027 and that Legacy was changing the day. And then, they said, no, we signed a deal for 2026 and you're trying to back out of the deal. And then recently we came to find that TJ Pusher is trying to purchase Rick Ware Racing, but is keeping Cody Ware and Rick Ware on. And then we basically found out that he was the one that kind of brokered the deal for Legacy. If we don't see Legacy win the lawsuit, don't get their third charter, there is a chance they could buy or merge the Haas factory team going into next year. What's interesting is the Haas factory team, and Gene Haas does have association with Toyota and Toyota Gazoo Racing in Formula One, as Toyota is a pretty big partner with that group over there in Formula One at this time. So I absolutely do think there's a really strong possibility on this front that you're going to see the team over there. If the Haas factory team does in fact end up going to Toyota next season, I would expect Cole Custer to drive the 41. I don't see him losing his seat. It could have a big effect on Sam Mayer and Sheldon Creed. I believe both drivers have contracts with Ford going into next season at the moment, so I expect that is a very likely possibility that we'll see Cole Custer in not a Haas factory car, but potentially a Legacy Motor Club car going into next year. But this is just a backup plan currently at the moment. This is not official word. This is just a backup plan and plan B if things do go south in regards to the Legacy Motor Club and Rick Ware Racing lawsuit. If Rick Ware loses the lawsuit, though, then expect that you will see Legacy get that charter. Haas factory team will stick around and Ford will not have any issues. Though there are rumors that Team Penske could be opening up their program once again, and maybe Carson Quaffle does have a development deal. But the big thing many of you have clicked for is Connor Zilisch. Dorpo Leclerc mentioned this on their podcast, but it sounds like that the announcement will finally be coming for Connor Zilisch at some point this week, as they say at the end, as they mentioned about him being on the podcast next week after Watkins Glen. Announcement is expected according to them at some time this week. Now, they did not say exactly which day Connor Zilisch will be officially announced and confirmed. My best guess, a lot of times you have a lot of these big announcements happen on Wednesday, so my best guess it will probably be tomorrow at some point, or could be by the end of the week. I think this weekend would make a lot of sense. It, of course, will be the 1-year anniversary of his first ever NASCAR Xfinity Series win, which I do expect it to be a major factor there. Of course, he also is competing in triple duty. He is making his 3rd career Cup Series start, I'm pretty sure, 4th career Cup Series start this weekend. He's made 2 starts on ovals and will be a 2nd start on road courses. Connor has been very, very good at road course racing, at top 5 speed at Circuit Americas. Unfortunately, got caught up in a crash with Daniel Schwartz, who could be with Junior Motorsports going into the 2026 year. Continuing on, he also had decent speed at Atlanta, finishing inside the top 15 in that race. And also, he had decent speed at the Coast 600, despite the fact he was 2 laps down. He finished in 23rd. I think he's ready to make the jump up. Look, I know he didn't have the best race at Iowa Speedway, but Connor Zilisch is also still a very young driver and is still learning at this point. And despite the fact he had incidents on the racetrack, he's had 10 consecutive top 5 finishes, one of the longest streaks we have seen in recent memory. And he's had 4 or 5 wins in that same stretch as well, and already has 5 wins so far this year, and it's absolutely the favorite to win the NASCAR Xfinity Series race. And in my opinion, he's a favorite to not only win the regular season championship at this point, but I think he's also the favorite to win the NASCAR Xfinity Series championship this year. So I expect Zilisch to be a major, major factor there. For 2026, I think we have to have realistic expectations for Connor. I do not expect Connor Zilisch to be a major, major factor at most tracks. One, the Trackhouse Racing team, they've been a little bit inconsistent in recent years. But number 2, the other big reason why is because I think Connor Zilisch is a rookie. Remember, he'll be a rookie next year at 19 years old. But I think he'll be able to hold on to those challenges, and I think he'll show some good pace and solid speed throughout next year with Trackhouse, especially on the road course tracks. I think that's the type of track where he is going to be really strong and really solid and very, very good. So I expect Zilisch to be really, really good next year, especially on the road courses. I think him and SVG are going to be competing for wins next year, and I think he'll also make some select Xfinity Series starts at some point next year from what I've heard. So if he does move up, which I think, again, it's very likely he'll be moving up next year, I expect that move to come very, very soon. Again, I do expect Zilisch to be officially announced and confirmed sometime this week, which should be exciting and really fun. We're going to talk about Connor here in just a second with the Kaden Honeycutt news, but nonetheless, it looks like Connor Zilisch will finally be officially announced and confirmed. They'll be going full-time NASCAR Cup Series racing with Trackhouse Racing next year very, very soon. And now we're going to head on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Kaden Honeycutt. Now, we talked about the story on the channel earlier today, but it was shockingly announced and confirmed that Kaden Honeycutt has been released from Nice Motorsports effective immediately. In a statement from Nice Motorsports, they have confirmed that he will not be back with the organization for the remainder of the 2025 season. He has informed the team and organization that he has found a different OEM and a different team that he'll be signed for the 2026 season. So we're moving on from him very, very quickly. It was confirmed as well that for this weekend at Watkins Glen, Connor Zilisch will drive the number 45 car for Nice Motorsports. I think he is now absolutely the favorite to win that event. And then Bailey Curry is going to drive the truck for the rest of those races starting at Richmond, which will be the regular season finale. Now, when I heard this news, and I heard rumors and speculation on Kaden Honeycutt not being back with the team, I was initially very, very shocked. But then you start hearing a lot of stuff about Connor Zilisch making a truck start with Nice. And they had their lineup officially filed, and Spire had their lineup set for the event. So then you're thinking, what is going on with Kaden Honeycutt currently at the moment? Now, personally, yes, Kaden Honeycutt, like is mentioned, has signed a deal. We'll get to that team in just a second. But I am not a massive fan of doing this kind of stuff where you release a driver in the middle of the season, and especially with how good Kaden has been with Nice Motorsports. He's been so much better than Matt Mills this year, who has struggled with Nice in the second year. He's been with that program, and he's 9th in the regular season standings currently at the moment for trucks, and is 73 points above the cutoff line at this point. I really think they should have let him have been able to finish the remainder of the season with this team. But this is not the first time we've seen something like this happen. Matt DiBenedetto was let go from Rackley a couple of years ago, back in 2023, despite the fact he was just close to making it to the round of 8 for the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series Plus. They let him go early, and a lot of people, including myself, were not really happy, because I personally think that if you're running really, really good for a team, even if you sign for another organization, I don't think that the team should be able to drop you. I'm not a major, major fan of that. But I will say for Kaden Honeycutt, according to what we are hearing, it sounds like he's probably got a really good ride going into the 2026 year. Let's move on to the next thing. So where will Kaden Honeycutt drive, at least for this weekend at Watkins Glen? Well, we are going to see him drive this weekend for Young's Motorsports. I believe he's driven for Young's Motorsports in the past, in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series before, and I think this is going to be a decent truck. I think he'll be able to get the best out of the equipment. We've seen him do that with Nice Motorsports and show some really, really good speed. So I expect, at least for this weekend, he is going to be joining up with them in the 02 truck, though no official announcement has been confirmed. He's noted on the intros to be expected in the 02. What does it mean, though, for the remainder of the season since he's going to be in the playoffs? Well, we all know that Stewart Friesen will not be back probably for the remainder of 2025, as he's still going to be recovering from the injuries that he suffered in that big block modified event. But they're still going to be competing for the Owners' Championship. It sounds like, according to what a lot of people are saying, it sounds like that maybe Kaden Honeycutt will be the driver of the 52 truck for the remainder of the season starting at Richmond. I think this actually is going to be a really good opportunity. I think Halmer Friesen Racing has shown some really good speed this year, and I think especially with how good Stewart Friesen has been in that truck, of course, got the win at Michigan, and I think if Kaden, I think right now being a little better of a driver than Stewart Friesen on the NASCAR side at this point, this makes a lot of sense. But now talking about this different OEM and different manufacturer. What is a team and what is a manufacturer? Well, according to what a lot of people are saying, it sounds like he'll be going over to Toyota in 2026. And what Bob Pockers has indicated, it sounds like he'll be headed over to Tricon Garage in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series in 2026. What this means is that he will likely end up being in one of the trucks that is currently being driven by certain drivers. Now, he could drive the number 1 truck next year, the All-Star truck, and that is certainly a possibility. And you could see 5 full-time trucks in 2026. But I think there's at least 1 or 2 drivers that is going to end up getting replaced by Kaden Honeycutt going into next year. One of those could be Tony Breidinger in the 5 truck, and I think that Kaden will be a lot better in the 5. But I think because Tony Breidinger brings a ton of funding to Tricon Garage, and Toyota is such a big fan of her, they're not going to want to see her be released from that ride. So I don't think it's going to be the 5. Some are going to mention Gio Ruggiero. Gio's a rookie, so Gio, in my opinion, does not need to be leaving the team. He's actually been really solid with the team. He's been the only other Tricon driver that's kept up with Corey Heim this season. So I don't think it would make any sense to get rid of him, considering how well and how strong he has been with this program so far this year at times. Some will mention, of course, Tanner Gray. Tanner Gray is the grandson of the team, so he's not going anywhere, at least for the foreseeable future. This leads to the current number 1 driver at the team, and that is Corey Heim. There's a lot of chatter that he's going to be taking over the 11 truck going into next year and basically having Scott Zipadelli as a crew chief. And that would lead Corey Heim maybe moving up next year. There is talk that Corey Heim may be moving up to the NASCAR Xfinity Series next year. Maybe 23XL Racing could field an Xfinity Series program for next year. Maybe they'll form that up and maybe have partnership with Sam Hunt Racing. Or you may end up seeing Corey Heim full-time in the Xfinity Series with Sam Hunt Racing going into 2026. And I've said it before, Corey Heim should not still be competing in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. He is way too good to be competing in the Truck Series at this point, and I think he's ready to make the jump. I mean, we've seen Booty Barker praise him, who will be his crew chief next weekend at Richmond, and I think that we've seen Corey show some stuff even in select Cup Series races throughout the 2025 season, so I think he's absolutely ready to make the jump. As for Kaden being the likely replacement to drive the number 11 truck, he will be the favorite to win the championship if he does go to Tricon Garage. We have seen what he's been able to do with underfunded equipment, and we've been able to see what he's done in even equipment that may not be absolutely amazing. He's shown some really good pace and solid speed with this Nice Motorsports organization. Again, I'm not a fan of releasing a guy early, but I think it will be actually an upside for the program, at least for Tricon. It's going to be an upside at least for Kaden Honeycutt's career. Now, continuing on with some other stuff, there is probably going to be some movement happening with the Truck Series as well and other things. And I think at least going back to Nice for a second, at least for this weekend, I think Connor will be the favorite to win. Connor is exceptionally really good at road course races, so that 45 truck is going to be solid and is going to be really, really strong as well. And then obviously, of course, Bailey Curry. I'm glad to see Bailey back behind the wheel. I know he probably doesn't want to be in these circumstances at this point, but I do think Bailey Curry will actually be really competitive with this team. He's shown some flashes with the 44 trucks so far this year, and I think he'll be pretty good behind the wheel. But I feel for Kaden in this situation. I think there's at least some really positive stuff coming out of this that will probably be announced here in the not-so-distant future, as Xfinity and Truck Silly Season are going to probably be picking up here soon. Same with some of the Cup Silly Season stuff very soon as well. I do wish they didn't have to cut him, but it's kind of how it is. I'm not a big fan of it, but unfortunately that's how they're doing it. And Kaden Honeycutt, like I've mentioned already before, will not be back with the Nice Motorsports team for the remainder of the year, and expect Kaden to end up driving for Halmer Friesen and expecting to drive potentially for Tricon Garage in the Truck Series in 2026. So, that is going to today's long NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me to Facebook and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go some below that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. How do you think Kaden Honeycutt's going to do with the new team next year, and how do you feel about him getting fired from the team? Learn your thoughts in the comments below. And how do you think Zilisch will do most likely next year in the Cup Series? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. In a couple hours from now, you're going to be seeing the Truck Series race picks for Watkins Glen. Tomorrow, we're going to have a NASCAR news video potentially on the channel. If we don't have a news video tomorrow, expect the Cup and Xfinity Series race picks to drop. Then on Thursday, we'll have a NASCAR news video along with the paint scheme video for the weekend at the Glen. And then on Friday, we'll have reactions to the Truck Series race and ARCA races potentially as well. And if any news breaks on Thursday, we'll have it on the channel. And then, of course, on Saturday and Sunday, reactions to Cup and Xfinity Series from Watkins Glen, reactions to those and qualifying sessions and all that. And then on Monday, we should have a NASCAR news video dropping as we head to Richmond. We got a lot of content coming on people like Haley Deegan, Shane Van Gisbergen, Carl Hurts, Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch, Paul Walsh, Ross Chastain, Sheldon Creed, Sam Mayer, Cody Savard, Dodge Ram, Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, Ryan Preece, you name it, Brad Kazowski, all the good stuff we'll be talking about on the channel in the coming days and weeks. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.